Welcome, where the past whispers you to sleep.
How medieval peasants endured deadly winter nights using a shockingly clever trick. You know, sometimes the nights when you toss and turn. Too tired to stay awake, but somehow unable to fall asleep, are not so different from what the poor of the Middle Ages once lived through. That feeling of exhaustion, yet sleep won't come. The cold inside heavier than the cold outside. They lay awake too, wishing for a simple trick that could help them drift into a safer, warmer sleep. And the surprising thing is, they actually had one. A strange, gentle method almost no one today remembers. But before I tell you that secret, lie down comfortably and let me guide you into a small corner of history. Softly, slowly, without effort. Imagine you're lying in your own bed. The lights have dimmed. Your breathing begins to soften like tiny waves, touching the shore of some ancient coast. The weight of your whole day, the thoughts that linger, the things you didn't finish, are beginning to dissolve. Like morning mist over a medieval field, I'm here beside you, speaking quietly, simply to lead you into a gentle journey. There is nothing to worry about, nothing you need to analyze. Nothing in this world is asking you to push a little more. Just listen and let your mind slow down, like a leaf drifting onto a still lake. Take a deep breath. Hold it lightly, then let it out softly, so your shoulders fall loose, as if you yourself were living inside a tiny wooden cottage from hundreds of years ago. Tonight, we'll return to a faraway age where poor farmers faced a cold that felt sharp enough to cut through skin. They had no heaters, no soft mattresses, no warm yellow lamps like the one beside you now. And yet they slept. They still found ways to stay warm, to keep their spirits steady through nights that felt endlessly long. And the strange thing is, their method was so simple that most people today would never believe it. A small secret that carried them through 1,000 winters and might help you drift into deeper rest tonight. You only need to stay still and let the story lead you into a place that feels safe and calm, as if time itself were slowing down, as if the world outside paused for a moment, just so you could rest. Let your breath lull you. Let this voice guide you. And together, we'll open that door. The door to the medieval secret of peaceful sleep. Right now, tonight, before we step fully into the lives of those ordinary souls in the Middle Ages, I want to invite you to settle into the quietest moment of your day. A moment meant only for you. No calls, no demands, no unfinished tasks chasing you. Let the room around you slow down. Let the light soften even just a little. And if you can, lie down comfortably, as if your body has waited all day for this chance to release everything. Take a slow breath in. Hold it gently and let it fall out, so your shoulders loosen. Your heartbeat softens. Your mind stops resisting all it has carried. In your imagination, picture an old wooden door before us. Time has worn it down, leaving dark grooves like memories etched into its grain. Candlelight washes over it in a warm, pale glow. So warm you might want to reach out and touch it. On the other side of that door is another world. Not the world of deadlines, unread messages, and tasks that stretch on forever, but a world that moves gently, slowly, quiet as an ancient evening's breath. When you place your hand on the door, a breeze from that distant age slips through the cracks, carrying the scent of damp grass, dry straw, and kitchen smoke drifting softly in the air. You hear faint sounds, wind brushing a thatched roof, a candle crackling, footsteps moving lightly across an old dirt floor. No rush, no pressure, just the simple rhythm of a time when every evening was a small gift. I am sitting here with you in that dim candlelit room, not as a storyteller, but as a quiet companion, whispering simply to make the night a little easier for you. You don't need to try to listen. You don't need to remember anything. This story isn't here to teach you or to make you think hard. It's only here to keep you safe, keep you warm, and let your heart breathe more softly. When night touches history, everything shifts just a little. Time stops running. The noise fades. Layers of memory fall away. What remains are people who once lived through nights, very much like yours. Cold nights, tired nights, nights full of thoughts, nights when they wished only to sleep in peace. Imagine, in a corner of a medieval wooden house, a small red fire still glowing, trying to hold on to its last warmth. A candle flickers on a rough wooden table, casting soft, wavering stripes of light on the wall. The wind outside slips through narrow door cracks, carrying the voice of the earth, gentle enough not to disturb anyone. This is the world we are about to enter. A night from long ago, where poor farmers prepared themselves to battle the freezing cold. They had no real warm clothes, no thick blankets, no modern heaters, or tightly sealed rooms. But they had each other. They had small traditions, passed down through generations. And those simple things are what kept them alive through winters that seemed endless. We won't enter wars. We won't enter politics. We won't follow the storms of their era. We will walk into their evenings, their breaths, their small pockets of warmth. And as you listen, your own mind will begin to find its warmth too. Now, if you wish, close your eyes. That medieval room is fading into view, becoming clearer, as if you are stepping into it. You feel the faint cold touch your skin. Then the fire's warmth drifting closer. The wind outside softens. The candle keeps burning. Someone, maybe you, breathe slower. Everything in this story moves slowly, so you won't be pulled or pushed, only guided. From worry to looseness to calm. Because tonight, you don't need to be strong. You don't need to push through. You don't need to stay alert. Tonight, you only need to lean into a gentle moment. Let history carry you. Let the story hold you. And let sleep come when it wants to. When you feel ready, we'll open that door together and discover how the medieval poor survived the coldest nights with a secret no one expects. But first, one more breath, soft, long, slow, to let your mind truly lie down. We begin now. Part 1, the slow morning of an ancient craftsman. Morning in the small riverside village arrived slowly. Not the kind of slow that makes people restless, but a soft, tender slowness like the mist rising from the river. while the sky is still a deep shade of blue. When you imagine that place, picture a thin layer of fog resting on the low thatched roofs, covering each home with a pale white veil, a light blanket that nature gently laid down, as if to keep the village asleep for just a few more minutes. Everything is quiet, still, and peaceful, as though even time isn't ready to begin the day. In the smallest house at the edge of the village, the old craftsman slowly opened his eyes. He didn't sit up right away. Back then, no one had alarm clocks. There was only the rhythm of one's own heartbeat and the faint sound of morning approaching. He lay still for a moment, listening to the water brushing the riverbank far away, to the birds calling each other softly from within the mist. His body was used to waking in the cold that seeped up from the ground, but he never rushed to leave the faded, frayed blanket covering him. A long breath in, a quiet moment accepting the cold as simply part of life. Then he lifted himself up. The house was dim, lit only by the weakest morning light slipping through the rough wooden walls. He walked toward the small hearth built from smooth river stones, his hands calloused. Cracked moved with surprising gentleness, as though everything he touched was something precious. He bent down and gathered a few leftover pieces of wood from the night before. They were dry, carrying that sweet, slightly sharp scent that only those who live near forests would recognize. He placed them at the center of the hearth and reached for the bit of glowing coal that he had carefully kept buried under ash through the night. A soft breath. The ember brightened. Another gentle breath. And then it happened. The first flame of the morning rose, like a warm sigh filling the room. In that moment, the whole house seemed to come alive. Golden firelight brushed shimmering patterns across the wooden walls. The space grew warm, not with luxury, but with the feeling of someone placing a thick shawl gently around your shoulders. The craftsman held his rough hands close to the fire. Warmth seeped into every cracked line of his skin, making him close his eyes. It wasn't the comfort of convenience. It was warmth earned, created by human hands to push back the cold of the world. A very ancient warmth, a very human one. When the fire grew steady, he placed a small pot of water over it. The pot was old,
It was a long day.
its bottom stained gray,
Yes, very.
but the sound of water slowly
Dinner
heating
is ready.
was deeply comforting. The tiny crackling of bubbles set the rhythm for the morning. He rose and stepped outside. The door was only two thin wooden planks tied with rope. Yet when he pushed them open, the cold outside poured in like a spilling river. The early air smelled of mist, damp soil, and the faint scent of straw left from last season. He bent down to scoop water from the bucket set beside the wall. The water was so cold that it numbed his skin instantly,
Wow, that sunset
as if
is
winter
so
itself were
pretty.
brushing against him. But he didn't flinch. He splashed the water onto his face, letting the cold awaken him fully. That was how he stepped into each new day. From the warmth of the hearth to the cold water over his hands, from darkness to the pale light of morning mist. He returned inside just as the pot began to ripple. The scent of rising steam blended with the smell of burning wood, creating a fragrance he had known his entire life. A scent no modern morning could quite imitate. He took a small clay cup and poured in a little hot water. Not tea. Nothing fancy. Just hot water. He held the cup in both hands, letting the heat seep deep into his palms. The steam rose upward, touching his face with a gentle greeting. And in that small moment, the moment warmth crept up from his hands to his arms. He felt a kind of comfort modern people rarely pause long enough to feel. The gratitude for simple things. Just a cup of hot water. Just a slow morning. Just a bit of fire in a stone hearth. Yet, together, these things shaped a strange, quiet peace. He sat beside the hearth, resting the cup on his knee. Outside, the mist still covered the rooftops, and the river beside the village flowed silently, like an endless ribbon of silver. No noise, no urgency, only the slow rhythm of a morning, in which people and nature seemed to breathe in unison. The warmth in his hands didn't only heat his body, it warmed something deeper, something no flame could touch. A warmth that was human, honest, ordinary, yet deeply soothing. And that was the rhythm of an ancient morning. A morning without hurry. A morning that began with a breath, a flame, and a simple cup of hot water, bringing life back into hands worn by time, much like the rising sun was preparing to warm the entire little village by the river. As the craftsman sat by the newly lit fire, he slowly turned the warm clay cup in his hands. The heat from the cup eased the numbness in his fingertips, spreading gradually through each joints that had long carried the weight of heavy work. He looked into the fire as if seeing the entire day ahead, but not with worry, with the quiet acceptance of someone who had lived his whole life in the steady rhythm of an ancient village. Outside, the morning mist had only begun to lift. The first light crept up from the horizon, not yet gold, not yet white, more like a thin silver ribbon being drawn upward behind the tree line. The village was still at rest. Only a few sounds stirred the silence. A buffalo shifting its weight, a cat walking lightly along a rooftop, and the early wind weaving softly through the narrow paths. The craftsman took a sip of hot water. It had no remarkable taste. And yet, to him, it was the most precious drink of the morning. Not for its flavor, but for its warmth. That warmth was like a quiet reminder. I am still here. I still have the strength to begin another day. He set the cup down and rose to prepare his tools. In the corner of the house, a low, dark wooden table waited. Upon it lay his familiar instruments: a chisel, a small hammer, and a few rough wooden planks he had left unfinished the day before. Each item rested exactly where it belonged, as though his hands knew their positions even without seeing them. He picked each tool up one by one, checking every dent, every crack, every cold edge of metal. None of them were perfect. None of them were shiny or new. Each tool had been repaired, sharpened, and patched many times. But that was their beauty. They were part of his life, companions shaped by decades of use. He took a coarse cloth and wiped the remaining sawdust from the tip of his chisel. The movement was slow, rhythmic. No rush, no urgency. Ancient mornings didn't chase the clock. They let people find their own tempo. When everything was ready, he placed the tools into a thick cloth bag hanging from a wooden peg. The soft clinking of metal meeting metal was a sound more familiar to him. Then the rooster's crow. He returned to the fire, where the water in the pot was still hot. He poured a little more into his cup and sat again, bringing his hands near the flame. This time, the firelight was brighter, stronger, and warmth reached him more quickly. The contrast between the cold outside and the heat inside made this morning feel especially gentle. He stayed like that for a long while, a stillness so rare that even a full day of work might not offer another moment like it. In that quiet, the first footsteps of the village began to echo softly in the distance. Someone opened a door. Someone called to an old cow. Someone lowered a bucket into the shallow well. The village was waking up. Not loudly, not hurriedly, but like a quiet procession of the earth itself. Each person knowing what must be done, each accepting what the day would bring. The craftsman rose once more. He took his thick woolen garment woven by hand and draped it over his shoulders. It was old, the fibers frayed in places, but it held warmth well. When he pulled the collar up toward his neck, the heat from the garment merged with the lingering warmth of the hot water inside him. It was a small moment, yet a powerful one. The warmth spreading through his cracked hands radiated outward in slow circles, and somehow it felt more comforting than when he had been lying under his blanket. That warmth wasn't only from the hot water. It was warmth born from familiarity, from the rituals he had repeated for years, from a craft he had dedicated his entire life to, from mornings he had lived through thousands of times, yet never grown tired of. He lifted the tool bag onto his shoulder and stepped outside. The wooden door closed behind him with a soft sound, a sound gentle enough to stir a sense of belonging. Outside, the village was awake, not through noise, but through subtle movement. A thread of smoke lifting from a neighbor's roof, water splashing into a wooden bucket, the swishing of a broom sweeping loose dirt from a courtyard. The mist was still thick, but the light had brightened, and the craftsman could feel the earth beginning to shift toward day. He followed the narrow path toward the riverbank. The ground beneath him was damp and slightly slick, but he walked slowly, as though he knew every stone, every patch of grass. The river beside the village flowed quietly, not fast, not sluggish, a pace that matched his own breath.
Here's a nice warm
He
piece for
arrived
you.
at the small clearing where he worked.
Thank you, Dad. It looks
No
so
large workshop.
crispy.
No sturdy roof, just a small patch of land overlooking the river. A place where morning sunlight touched softly every day. He set down the tool bag and inhaled deeply, letting the cold morning air mix with the warmth still lingering in his chest. A new day was about to begin, but it would begin in the slowest, softest, calmest way he could hope for. A morning without wealth, without luxury, yet complete in its own ancient way. The warmth of the hot water still lingered on his hands, and he knew that with just that small warmth, he had enough to carry him through the long morning ahead. After finishing the last bite of his bread, the craftsman set his cup of hot water aside and pushed his chair back slightly. By now, the kitchen had brightened a little, its walls glowing with the flicker of the fire, and the faint morning light slipping in through the doorway. Yet even as the light changed, the rhythm of the morning inside this small home remained just as calm, just as grounded. He sat there, hands resting gently on his knees, letting his body settle after the simple meal. Not because he was full. The food was far too modest for that in modern terms, but because he wanted to stay in this moment a little longer. That moment when the stomach feels just warm enough, the breath is steady, and the mind is as empty as a sheet of paper no one has written on yet. He didn't rush to stand. He didn't hurry toward work. He simply let the warmth of the bread, the butter, and the hot water flow from his chest into his belly,
Save room for tea.
down his arms, and into every tired joint of hands that had labored a lifetime. Smoke drifted upward from the hearth toward the roof beams, curling into thin, pale ribbons, like delicate strands of silk dancing through the air. Another subtle smell appeared when the smoke brushed the old charred wood. The scent of ash, of softened timber, of the ancient warmth that seemed to linger in homes like this for hundreds of years. The craftsman leaned down, picked up the remaining portion of the loaf, and wrapped it in a piece of coarse cloth. The bread was hard, but he always saved a piece for noon, or for the hunger that came between tasks. The way he wrapped it was careful, almost tender, like someone holding on to something precious, not because of its value, but because food, in that age, was never taken lightly. When he stood, the wooden chair let out a small, old creak, not an unpleasant sound, more like the sigh of an old companion who had sat with him for many years. He placed the chair back exactly where it belonged, not a half step out of place. People then lived in small spaces. Everything had its spot, and returning items precisely became a habit woven into every gesture. He turned toward the doorway, where a small wooden basin held water. The water was cold, cold enough that when he dipped his hands in to wash them, the chill bit lightly at his skin. But the sensation sharpened his senses, as though the morning were reminding him that the day's work waited outside. He dried his hands with a worn cloth. From the yard came scattered sounds, someone beating dust from their clothes, the footsteps of a child running past the gate, a neighbor calling after a wandering hen. A rooster crowed. A fire crackled in another home. All of it blended into a morning melody the village had sung for generations. The craftsman stepped outside, letting the cold morning air touch his face. The wind carried the scent of straw, of damp soil, and sometimes the faint smoke from other kitchens in the village. He stood still for a moment, closing his eyes, as the wind brushed the collar of his woolen garment. It was the moment when one feels the pleasant contrast between the cold outside and the lingering warmth inside. A warmth stitched together from fire, bread, and hot water. He bent and picked up a piece of firewood by the door. Habit always made him keep a few pieces outside, in case the fire died unexpectedly when his hands touched the cold, rough surface of the wood. A memory flickered across his mind. Mornings of his childhood, sitting beside his mother as she kneaded dough. The smell of barley, the smell of smoke, the smell of melting butter. Scents that had followed him all his life. That familiarity warmed his heart, as surely as the hearth had warmed his hands. When he stepped back inside to set the wood in its place, his pace slowed, not because he was tired, but because he cherished each small moment of this simple morning. Every movement had its own rhythm, its own quietness, as though nothing outside needed to be done any faster. When the kitchen was tidy again, he sat for a moment more. He opened the cloth once more and looked at the remaining piece of bread. He knew he wouldn't eat it yet, but he wanted to look at it, the way one looks at an object that holds the emotion of a morning. Then slowly, very slowly, he wrapped it again and placed it into his bag. The soft rasp of cloth rubbing against itself was as gentle as wind touching a thatched roof. A small sound, yet full of reassurance, like a quiet reminder that he had prepared enough for the long day ahead. He stood up. This time, he did not sit again. The moment to begin work had come. But before leaving the kitchen, he pressed his palm to the side of the hearth, where the stones were still warm. The heat moved into his skin, like a whispered blessing. Today will be all right. And he smiled. A small smile, brief, but warm enough to soften his whole face. He stepped through the doorway one last time, closing it behind him, leaving the warmth of the kitchen inside, and carrying with him the warmth of breakfast, the warmth of bread, of butter, of fire, and that tiny cracking sound, a warmth bright enough to light the entire morning. Of an Ancient Craftsman, Part 3, The Familiar Path in the Early Light. When the craftsman stepped out of his small kitchen, the last traces of warmth from the hearth still clung to his palms. He pulled the collar of his coarse wool garment a little higher, shielding himself from the lingering chill of dawn, and then stepped outside. The wooden door closed behind him with a soft sound, like a quiet farewell, leaving behind the scent of smoke and the gentle heat of the morning fire. Outside, the dirt path leading from his home still held streaks of unmelted mist. The ground felt soft, the wind was light, and the entire village seemed as though it were still half asleep. No one was rushing. There were no carts, no noisy arguments, no clamor of a busy day, only the distant crow of a rooster somewhere in a nearby yard. A gentle reminder that morning had truly arrived, and the sound of the craftsman's wooden clogs, touching the earth one step at a time, steady, soft, like a visible breath. He walked slowly along the familiar path, a path he had taken countless times throughout his life. Yet the morning always made everything feel new. Even this uneven road, full of stones and exposed roots, held a quiet beauty before the sun had fully risen. The craftsman looked around. The thatched roofs on either side of the path still drooped low, like sleepy friends unwilling to wake up. Kitchen smoke rose from only a few homes, signaling that not everyone in the village woke as early as he did. Some doors were still closed, while others were slightly ajar, revealing glimpses of mothers waking their children. Nothing was loud. Nothing was crowded. Only small, tender movements of an ancient village. Slowly opening its eyes, he passed the home of an elderly neighbor, where a hen was busy pecking at the ground in one corner of the yard. Its pecking sounded crisp and lively, a tiny sound, but one that made the path feel more awake. From another yard came the quick steps of someone in wooden clogs, followed by a sudden stop, and the soft, bubbling laughter of children. Each sound was like a thin thread, weaving itself into the morning tapestry, through which the craftsman walked.
The children are tired.
He didn't need to look
We'll be
closely.
there soon. Rest your feet.
He didn't need to study anything. He just walked and let the morning come to him naturally. The dirt path stretched ahead, long, but not wide, soft, but not slippery, as though it had been made for unhurried steps, not for running, not for rushing, In those times, people didn't think of themselves as walking from home to work. They simply walked to begin the day, and the path became part of their own breathing. The craftsman inhaled deeply. The morning air touched his lungs like a thin veil of frost. It sharpened his senses, but didn't make him shiver. Instead, it made him feel more present in every footstep, walking alone along the empty path. Yet he wasn't lonely. The village was beside him. The sounds, the mist, the sunlight preparing to arrive. It was a kind of solitude that was different. Not lost, not empty, but held gently by the peace of the earth itself. He relaxed his shoulders and took a few more steps. As the road curved around an old oak tree, light from the horizon suddenly spread forward. Like a thin golden sheet, the sun was still weak, but strong enough to wash the air in a soft warmth. And just as he stepped past the oak, a single ray of morning sunlight touched his cheek. Just one, but strangely warm. Not the burning warmth of noon. Not a hurried warmth, but a gentle one, patient and kind, like a small finger of nature, resting tenderly against his skin. He stopped, not to think, but to feel. The sunlight lingered on his cheek, tiny as a grain of glowing dust, yet enough to make his heart dip for a moment. A quiet, easing moment, as though time itself wished to rest its head on his shoulder. Before moving on, the craftsman closed his eyes and let that ray of light hold him. A thin ribbon of warmth moved along his face, down his neck, and into his chest. He found himself smiling, not because of anything grand, but because of the feeling of being touched by light. A feeling utterly human, utterly real, utterly pure. When he opened his eyes, the dirt path was still waiting. The houses were still drowsy. The rooster still called from afar, and his wooden clog, steady and slow, continued tapping against the earth. This morning, nothing was extraordinary, yet it was extraordinary enough to make the craftsman feel that he wasn't alone in the wide world, as though that single ray of sunlight was walking with him, slowly, quietly, peacefully, like an invisible companion. The craftsman continued walking, the first ray of sunlight fading gently from his cheek. The dirt path ahead curved slowly, as if it too wanted to stretch the morning a little longer. For anyone willing to walk through it, there were no carts, no noise, only the soft tapping of wooden clogs on earth. Steady,
good tonight.
rhythmic,
Yes, the rain should help.
like the heartbeat of dawn. He looked down at his feet. The wooden clogs were old, worn at the toes and rough at the heels. But their sound, that familiar toque, tock, tock, was one of his favorite parts of the morning. A whisper saying, "Just walk. There's no need to hurry." Along that dirt path, the craftsman felt he had more to listen to than to say. The clucking of a hen in a far-off yard, the lazy snort of a buffalo, not yet ready for the fields, the soft brushing of thatched roofs as the wind moved between them. All these small sounds gathered into a gentle morning song that only early risers ever hear in full. At a few houses he passed, the windows were still shut, not because people were deeply asleep, but because they wanted to hold on to their warmth for a few more minutes before stepping out into the cold. Rough cloth curtains shifted slightly, signaling that someone inside was awake, quietly savoring the last softness of the night before morning claimed the room. Passing these homes, the craftsman didn't feel alone. Instead, he felt as if he were walking through a little forest of sleeping dreams, each house holding its own quiet world within. The stillness around him made him feel safe. Not the kind of safety that comes from protection, but the kind that comes from knowing everyone is living in the same breath, the same rhythm. As he walked, he ran his fingers gently along his wool collar.
That did the trick.
The warmth there softened the chill on his hand,
Yeah, and this marshmallow.
reminding him of the hot cup of water. Another warmth, gentle and quiet, that had softened his heart. The way the morning earth softened under his steps. He paused in front of a low shrub by the path. Droplets of dew clung to its leaves, round and clear, catching the earliest sunlight filtering through the distant treetops. He touched one drop with his fingertip. It was cold, but the chill didn't make him flinch. If anything, it made him feel fully present in the morning, not rushing through it, but living inside it. Suddenly, a child dashed out from a nearby yard, holding a tiny chick in their hands. The child stopped to look at him, eyes bright and curious. But instead of speaking or greeting, they simply smiled softly and ran off again. The craftsman smiled back, even though he knew the child could no longer see him. These fleeting moments, a sudden smile, an innocent glance, were enough to add another small warmth to his morning. The path widened as he approached the center of the village. The mist thinned, leaving shimmering streaks of light across the ground, like soft strands of silver scattered everywhere. A few women were already awake, drawing water from the communal basin. The sound of water pouring, the clink of clay bowls touching, and the tapping of a woodpecker on a distant tree, all blended into a gentle chorus. The craftsman bowed his head in greeting. No need for long looks, no need for words. Presence alone was enough to feel he belonged here. He continued walking, and as he stepped out from beneath the trees, it felt as though the sun had been waiting for him. A thin, pale sheet of light poured onto the path, making the dust shimmer softly.
Fire is absolutely
The light was
perfect
so
tonight.
gentle that when he raised his hand, it seemed to slip between his fingers without leaving a trace of heat. And then, the moment arrived. A second ray of sunlight, warmer, clearer, touched his cheek. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't bright. It was soft, like the hand of a loved one, gently placed on his face to wake him. He stopped, this time longer than before, as if giving the light all the time it needed to say what it wanted to say. Warmth slid across his skin, along his jaw, toward his neck. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. There are moments in life that need no explanation, no effort, no attempt to remember. They simply need to be lived long enough for their feeling to settle gently through the body. And the touch of early sunlight on his cheek was one of those moments. It wasn't the promise of a brilliant day. It wasn't a sign of anything grand, but it softened his heart. Soft like earth after rain. Soft like wool dried in the sun. Soft like the warm steam from a morning cup of water. He opened his eyes. Everything looked a little brighter, not because of the light itself, but because he felt renewed by the gentleness of nature. He continued walking, his heart light, as if that sunlight had placed inside him a quiet assurance that no matter how long the path, no matter how tiring the day ahead, there would always be small moments, small, tender, warm moments to keep his heart steady. And with that, under the first true light of morning, he understood something that needed no words. Morning always arrives, as long as we walk slow enough to feel it. Part 4, the old craft, hands that tell stories. After walking the sunlit dirt path, the craftsman turned into a small yard behind a low wooden fence. This was his workshop, a space so simple one might miss it if they didn't look closely. Just a rough wooden roof, a few makeshift walls, and long, thin cracks of sunlight drawn across the space like pencil strokes made by the morning sun. He stepped inside. Light filtered through the gaps in the wooden planks, falling in soft beams that met the floating grains of sawdust, creating shimmering threads of pale light that drifted like mist. The smell of wood, of soil, of metal cooled through countless seasons, all blended into one scent so familiar that the craftsman needed only a shallow breath to know he was home. On the low work table lay several things he had left unfinished from the day before. A partly woven cloth on its frame, a small piece of pottery waiting to be shaped again, and 3 dull knives he was sharpening. For a farmer in the village, the craftsman wasn't bound to a single trade. In those days, anyone who could use their hands simply did whatever their hands were capable of. Weaving cloth, shaping clay, repairing tools, fixing broken objects, a little of everything, just enough to live and to keep the village running. He sat beside the loom first. The dark wooden frame had been with him for years, its surface smoothed by all the days his hands had rested on it. Coarse threads stretched gently across it, forming a flat surface, soft as early morning water. He lifted the shuttle and began to pull it through. Slow, steady, once to the left, once to the right. The shuttle touched the wooden edge with a tiny sound. Tuck, tuck. Not sharp, not loud, just enough for the heart to fall into the rhythm of morning. That repeated motion felt like a lullaby. He was quietly singing to himself. No one wove cloth quickly. No one demanded more or rushed the process. In that time, patience was part of the craft. The craftsman leaned closer, letting sunlight through the wooden slits fall directly onto the forming fabric. He loved this moment, when each strand joined another to make a line. Each line joined others to form a pattern, and the pattern would someday become a cloth, soft enough to warm someone. On a cold night, he moved on to the second task. Pottery. On the table sat a lump of clay that had soaked overnight. It was damp, soft, and cold like the river's surface before sunrise. He set it in his palm and began to turn it. His thumb pressed gently into the center. His other hand stroked upward from below. The repeated motions created a faint, almost secretive sound. A quiet hiss as the clay slipped through his fingers. The sound was so soft It could be missed
I
entirely,
promise I won't.
but once heard,
It's our secret.
it felt calming in a way that made the world seem to breathe slower. Each turn made the clay smoother. Each gentle stroke made its shape clearer. No rush. No need for perfection at once. Everything took form gradually, in the rhythm of his hands. He set the half-shaped pot aside and moved to the final task. Sharpening blades. On the shelf rested a small piece of metal, worn yet still usable. If given new life, the craftsman took up the whetstone, poured a little water over it, and placed the blade at the right angle. The sharpening began. Shh, shh, shh. A long, slow sound full of friction and strangely soothing because of its steady rhythm. With every pull across the stone, the blade brightened a little more, then a little more still. Sunlight entering through the slits reflected off the metal's edge, drawing a thin streak of light along the length of the blade. That streak moved with the rhythm of his hands, as if the light itself were joining his steady motion. When he paused, sweat had begun to gather on his forehead, but he didn't feel tired. For him, every task in the morning was simply the next step in a long melody he had known since he was a boy. He set the blade aside and looked over everything. The forming piece of cloth, the shaped pot now rounder than before, the knife gleaming more brightly than when he had begun. And in that moment, in the tiny workshop, with sunlight slipping through the cracks and wood dust floating like drifting snow, a very gentle happiness appeared, a satisfaction that needed no words, a quiet fullness, not because he had finished something grand, not because there was any great achievement, but because he could see something taking shape, something made by hands that had worked through countless years, becoming real. In the stillness of morning, it felt like the quiet certification of a new day. You have done, and you can still do a little more. No applause needed. No one needed to see it. Just that soft light and his own hands telling a story. Only they could tell. The craftsman set the blade down on the table, then gently rolled his wrist to loosen the tendons. Though calloused and worn, his hands still moved with a softness like flowing water. That was the strange beauty of traditional artisans. Their hands were both strong and gentle, steady yet tender, as if carrying the memory of generations who had worked with their hands before them. In the small workshop, morning light continued to spill through the wooden slits, creating shifting lines of brightness across the work table. Whenever a breeze passed through, those lines trembled, as if the room itself were breathing. The craftsman looked around. There was nothing valuable here. Just a few old tools, some stacked pieces of wood in a corner, a three-legged stool, and a crude work table. But to him, this was a world of its own. A place where every sound moved slowly, every motion felt full, and everything carried its own natural rhythm. He returned to the unfinished cloth,
Did you see
the coarse
butterfly
threads,
near the big tree?
stiff at first glance,
It was yellow.
looked softer under the morning light.
Followed us here.
He picked up the shuttle once more and continued weaving. This time, he no longer looked at the fabric as a task to be completed. He looked at it as a story slowly unfolding before him. Pull to the left. Tack. Pull to the right. Tuck. That familiar sound rose again, blending with the whisper of the breeze to form a delicate melody. It was so steady that if someone stood there long enough, their own heartbeat might fall in step with it. On every strand, sunlight settled gently, creating patches of brightness, like tiny windows glowing in a dark room. The craftsman touched the cloth's surface, feeling its roughness, its firmness. His fingers glided across the threads, with the trust of someone who had woven his entire life. No rush, no striving, just letting each motion tell its own story. After a while, he moved on to the clay. By now, the clay had softened, easier to guide. He placed it onto a simple turning wheel, a rough wooden disc he had crafted himself. With a gentle push of his foot, the wheel began to spin slowly, and he set both hands onto the clay. The clay turned. His hands held, and shape began opening like a humble flower. He pressed his thumb into the center, forming the bowl's hollow. Then he stroked upward along the sides, making the walls even, making them rise. The repeated motion, slow, steady, so hypnotic that anyone watching might grow drowsy. Just from the quiet rhythm of his hands, the sound of spinning clay, the faint scrape of wood, the craftsman's steady breath, all of it blended into an ancient kind of music. A music made not with instruments, but with hands. When the bowl finally took shape, he set the wet piece aside. In the sunlight, the clay surface gleamed faintly, as if wearing a thin glaze. Even before firing, he loved this moment, when an object, still incomplete, already carried its own clear form. It was the beauty of becoming, the beauty of process, not the beauty of perfection. He turned next to the blade he had been sharpening. He dipped a finger into water, feeling its coolness, then sprinkled a few more drops onto the stone. He positioned the blade at the same angle as before. Shk, shk, shk. The friction sounded again, like time itself, sliding out of one day and into the next. No one needed to say it, but everyone knew. The sound of metal being sharpened in morning light brought a deep sense of safety, as if with every pull along the stone, he was preparing a little more life for the whole village. After a long while, he stopped. The workshop fell silent, save for the soft breath of wind. Through the wooden slits, a beam of light fell directly on the blade, making it shine, thin and pale, like the crescent of a new moon. He lifted the knife to eye level, tilting it gently to inspect it from different angles. Not perfect, not glossy, but sharp enough to cut straw, and bright enough to show that his work had meaning. A small, soft happiness settled in his chest. Not a loud excitement, not the kind of joy that makes one want to show the world, but a natural, earthy satisfaction, like a quiet inside the mind. When effort begins to take shape, he stood, stretching his back, letting the sunlight wash over him. The beads of sweat on his temple caught the light, glimmering like a fresh drop of dew that had just fallen from the roof. In this little workshop, he knew better than anywhere else. that hands were not just for labor. Hands were for remembering, for holding the sensation of a morning, a time, a whole lifetime. He lifted his hand, studying it. The cracks, the darkened patches, the raised veins, all of them lines, written by time. These hands had woven countless meters of cloth, had shaped countless bowls, had sharpened countless blades for the village. And these same hands told his story every day, not through speech, but through repeated motions, as gentle as waves, lulled by sleep. He lowered his hand and breathed out softly. The room was so quiet that he could hear specks of sawdust falling onto the table. The workday had only begun, yet his heart already carried a small joy, one soft enough to warm the whole morning, a joy without words, a quiet happiness, and a moment only ancient craftsmen truly knew. When a creation begins to reveal itself in the light, like a story told by the hands that shaped it. Part 5. Midday rest beneath the old tree. The morning passed slowly, as if even time itself wished to linger in the craftsman's workshop a little longer. But when the sun began to rise toward its peak, and the shadows grew thin, he knew it was time for his midday rest. He brushed the layer of sawdust from his clothes, returned every tool to its proper place, and stepped out of the small workshop. There was no need to lock the door. In those days, people trusted one another, not through rules or locks, but through the village's quiet harmony, through familiar routines, and through the shared understanding that a person's greatest treasure was not their belongings, but their effort, their time. The path behind the workshop was soft, like freshly turned soil. It opened into a small clearing where an ancient tree stood alone, an old friend who had existed long before the craftsman was born. Its canopy spread wide, like a green roof, large enough to shelter the entire patch of earth beneath it. He walked toward it, slowly, gently, as though not wanting to disturb the resting shade lying perfectly still at its roots. Under the great tree, the ground was soft, warm, and carried the scent of decayed leaves that had blended with the soil for many years. When the craftsman sat down, the first sensation was the cool earth supporting his back, like leaning into a large pillow nature had prepared especially for him. He stretched his legs, pulled his cloak a little closer to shield himself from the breeze, then slowly lay back. His back touched the earth. His head rested on the soft grass. His eyelids fell without effort, not to sleep, just to let go. A deep, slow breath in, a long, open quietness in his chest, and then a breath out, released softly, as if he were giving a bit of his tiredness back to the sky. Above him, the canopy began to sway gently in the wind. The leaves brushed one another, cluster by cluster, layer by layer, with a softness like a thick blanket being folded. That sound, mixed with the faint murmur of birds nearby, formed a music only those who chose to lie still could truly hear. He kept his eyes closed, letting the sound flow through him, into his ears, into his chest, down his arms and legs. There was no scraping of metal, No wooden shuttle running through thread. Only the sounds of nature. Quiet, steady, and perfectly skilled in pulling a person into a floating space between wakefulness and rest. Sparrows called to one another close by, their short notes threading between long stretches of silence. The wind stroked the tops of grasses, making them bend together like a small green tide, and the old roots beneath the earth creaked faintly, deep, but soft, like the heartbeat of the ground, beating slowly beneath him. The craftsman felt his body merging with all of these sounds, not disappearing, just settling into a stillness that required no holding, no bracing. He placed one hand on his stomach, feeling each breath rise and fall. Everything was calm. Even the heat of the distant sun softened as it filtered through the thick leaves, turning into tiny dots of light, dancing on the ground beside him. Though he was alone beneath the great tree, he did not feel lonely. There was the shade, the earth, the wind whispering to the branches, and the birds, seemingly telling their own midday stories. He opened his eyes slowly. Just a narrow slit, enough to see the sky through the gaps in the leaves, where the sun drew small, soft circles of light. They swayed with the breeze, their rhythm so slow it could lull anyone into a drifting sleep. The leaves touched one another again. This time the sound was clearer, as though the ancient tree itself were breathing above him. Shh, shh. Ray, Ray. A rhythm so steady that anyone lying beside him would have felt their eyelids grow heavy. Within minutes, the craftsman closed his eyes again, this time deeper, longer. He let his arms loosen at his sides, let his body sink into the soft ground, let the wind brush his face. Without resistance, a gentle peace rose from within his chest. Not joy, not emotion, just a lightness, as if his mind were walking atop water. Not sinking, not floating upward, just drifting. This was his midday rest. No elaborate meal, no conversation, no clamor from a marketplace, no bustling livestock, only the shade of the ancient tree and a noon that breathed very slowly. He reached out and touched a leaf that had fallen beside him. It was dry, light, and crinkled softly like thin paper. When he held it, the sound blended with the rustling above, making this entire moment feel as soft as a blanket draped across the whole afternoon. The craftsman did not think about his unfinished work. He did not think about the long hours ahead. He did not think about tomorrow. He simply listened, simply lay there, simply let his mind drift with the rhythm of the leaves, the rhythm of nature, the rhythm of quiet, the rhythm of a wordless lullaby. And then, for a brief moment, that feeling widened, spreading through his whole body, making him want to remain under that tree forever, letting time slow as much as it wished. And there, in the moment when the leaves brushed together, in a heartbeat-like rhythm, the craftsman felt a peace, more vivid than anywhere else. A peace so gentle that anyone, simply by closing their eyes, could slip softly into sleep. The craftsman lay beneath the tree for a long time, long enough that he lost count of how many breaths he had taken. Since lowering himself onto the ground, noon was not like morning. Noon had a way of making everything slower, lazier, softer. The whole world seemed to drift on a quiet seesaw, never still, but never fully moving. The wind passed through the leaves again. Not strong, not urgent, just enough to stir each cluster of leaves, creating a chain of soft touches, like thousands of fingertips tapping lightly on a wooden surface. The sound fell from high above, slipped through layer after layer of leaves, and drifted down the trunk, finally reaching the craftsman's ears. Like a lullaby murmured by someone sitting right beside him. He opened his eyes a little, but the sunlight filtering through the green canopy made him close them again almost instantly. The shade beneath the tree wasn't dark, but it was warm enough to make his body want to sink deeper into the earth. Specks of sunlight fell across his face, moving with the breeze. Lazy little sparks playing across his skin. High above, the birds kept singing, but the midday quiet softened their voices, rounding the notes into something gentle, like droplets falling on a still lake. A few sparrows flew past. Their wings pushed the air in small whispers, a faint whoosh, and then they vanished into the higher branches. The craftsman noticed each sound, but he didn't hold on to any of them. They simply passed through him, light as the wind, soft as the sunlight, bare as the earth. He lifted a hand to shade his eyes, pushed himself halfway upright, and then lay down again. As the softness of the ground pulled him back, no one needed him to get up. No one was waiting for him. No one expected anything from him. Midday in the old world was a pocket of silence that no one tried to fill with tasks. Nearby, a yellow leaf drifted down, falling slowly, turning and turning, as if deciding where to land. The craftsman followed it with his eyes until it settled beside his leg. He touched it with the tip of his finger. The leaf was crisp, light, and carried that dry, sun-warmed smell that only midday can give. A stronger breeze moved through, shaking the whole canopy. Not enough to startle him, but enough to feel like someone had just pulled a soft blanket over the entire little forest. The leaves collided in a louder chorus. Rustle, rush, rush. Then slowly, returned to the steady breathing of noon. The craftsman rested both hands on the grass. The blades brushed his palms gently. The warm earth beneath the grass held the weight of his body, making him feel as though he were lying on the back of some gentle creature, sleeping in the same rhythm he was. No one ever said midday rest was for sleeping. But for him, these were the moments when his body was allowed to do nothing at all and feel no guilt for it. Small sounds continued drifting in. A twig snapping, an insect shifting its wings, a bird brushing the air once, with a single quiet stroke. Each sound landed like a tiny drop of water, falling into a still pond, not disturbing the surface, only sending out small, soft ripples that could lull anyone into the space between waking and dreaming. He lifted a hand and rested it on his chest. His breath touched his palm, warm and even. His heartbeat was so slow, he could barely feel it. And that slowness made his body as weightless as a leaf. He could not remember the last time he had a peaceful midday like this. Perhaps yesterday, perhaps a week ago. But every noon beneath the old tree felt the same, in the most beautiful way. Gentle, unhurried, and enough to let all tension melt into the wind. The canopy was thick enough that the ground beneath him remained cool. But farther off, sunlight spilled more strongly, forming bright carpets on the earth. The world was divided into two halves, a sunlit one and a shaded one. And he, lying right on the boundary between them, felt as if he were listening to two worlds whispering to each other. He turned onto his side and rested his head on his arm. Another deep breath. The wind carried the scent of earth, damp roots, old soil, and something ancient and gentle that made him want to close his eyes again, just to breathe it in. The leaves above changed rhythm, no longer a scatter of rustles, but a steady, waving sound,
Yes, and the textiles
like a
are
hand
away.
fan moving slowly overhead.
Rest awaits.
The rhythm continued. Again and again, a wordless lullaby, woven by nature itself. The craftsman touched the earth beside him, feeling it warmed by a sliver of sunlight that had slipped through the leaves. His skin warmed too. His breathing slowed even more. If someone had seen him just then, they might have thought he was asleep. But he wasn't. He was hovering between two worlds, awake enough to feel the tree's breath, dreaming enough to let go of every burden. That was the magic of midday rest. Not a meal, not a conversation, but a true pause. When the earth itself lulled a person with the sound of leaves, the wind's soft travel, and the quietness of quietness. He smiled faintly, a tiny curve of the lips that shifted his breath just a little. Then he closed his eyes completely. The leaves kept their rhythm. The birds kept murmuring. The wind kept arriving from somewhere far and drifting past him. And that midday became a perfect stillness, soft enough to make his heart loosen, like the soil beneath him, and his mind rest, like calm water, under the shade of the ancient tree. Part 6, a small story between people. When the sun began tilting toward the west, the craftsman rose from beneath the ancient tree. He brushed the dry leaves from his clothes and stood up slowly. His body still carried the drowsiness of midday, but his mind felt light and clear, like water after a gentle breeze has passed over it. He stretched, inhaled a long breath, and then made his way toward the village's small marketplace, the place where people gathered in the late afternoon to exchange whatever was left from the day. The old market was never a noisy place. There were no loud calls, no shoving or hurrying. Just a few simple stalls made of rough wood, their roofs covered with straw, their cloth shades tied with hemp rope. The path leading into the market was a strip of soft earth, where the slow footsteps of the villagers created warm, steady sounds, like the heartbeat of the afternoon. As the craftsman approached, he saw several people already sitting in front of their stalls. An old woman selling vegetables, her leafy bundles still damp with morning dew. A farmer arranging a few potatoes dug up earlier that day, and a blacksmith displaying 2 horseshoes he had just finished sharpening. The craftsman slowed his steps, almost as if he didn't want to disturb
The cottage roof
the peaceful haze settling over the place.
collecting a smooth layer
His
of
footsteps
untouched
merged with
white.
the others, each person walking a different direction, yet all sharing the same rhythm. Slow, steady, gentle. A woman sitting beside a basket of pottery looked up at him. "Oh, you're here already," she said, her voice soft as drifting wind. He nodded, answering with a faint, warm smile. "Yes, I came to see if anything needs mending, and also to walk a little. Helps me wake up," he said, his tone lighter than a greeting. The old woman smiled, her wrinkles drawing gentle lines around her eyes. "A long day of work, yet you still think of fixing things for others. This village owes you a great deal." The craftsman waved a hand, as if to say it was nothing. But inside, he felt the warmth of her words settle into him. Not as praise, not as heavy gratitude, but as a quiet kind of care. Ancient, honest, like the breath of the afternoon. He continued to the next stall, where the farmer was tying a bundle of potatoes. The man looked up, offering a wide, sincere smile. Was the morning a hard one? "Sir," the craftsman shook his head. "No, just a bit tiring on the hands, but a good kind of tiring." The farmer nodded. "I always like watching you work. So steady. Listening to it makes me sleepy." The words made the craftsman release a small, soft laugh, the kind that rarely came out loud, but always made others feel lighter when it did. He sat on the edge of an old wooden platform, setting his tool bag beside his feet. "And your home? Everything well?" he asked. The farmer finished tying the bundle, then answered with care. "All well, sir. My little girl had a small fever this morning, but she's better now, thanks to the heavens and to her mother's hands." The craftsman nodded, his gaze lowering to the earth, while his voice carried genuine concern. "A sick child. That always weighs on the grown-ups. Good thing she's improving." There was a brief pause. Not awkward, not empty, just a gentle stillness that felt like the entire village was breathing with them. Warm, slow, unhurried. A small boy ran past, holding a warm barley bun in his hands. He stopped in front of the craftsman and lifted the bun toward him. "Do you want some?" "Sir, I got an extra piece." The craftsman looked at the little bun, then at the boy's flushed, excited face. He reached out, gently resting his hand on the boy's head. A movement slow and soft as evening light. "Keep it, child. I'm full already." The boy grinned, a bright, clean smile that seemed to warm the entire market, then dashed off. The craftsman watched him go, and in that moment, his heart softened by one tender beat. A child's smile, free of agenda, free of hurry, reminded him that kind elderly woman folding a half-finished cloth looked up and smiled slowly. "You look peaceful today, craftsman," he answered in a voice soft as an exhale. "Perhaps I slept a little under the old tree." The woman chuckled, a deep, wooden sound, like old beams gently knocking together. Low, but warm enough to reach the deepest parts of a person. In the gentle afternoon light, that smile became a small bright flame, just enough to cast a warm glow around the craftsman's chest. A warmth not from the sun, but from people. Evening descended slowly, casting a pale golden light over the small market. Like a thin cloth being laid gently across it, the stalls did not grow busier, nor did they grow louder. They simply glowed a little more, as if the sun were finishing its last duty. Before withdrawing, the craftsman continued walking along the stalls, enjoying an atmosphere he had known all his life, yet had never grown tired of. Each step he took made a soft thump on the dry earth, a sound blending with the wooden sandals of others, the dragging of a woven basket across the ground, forming a quiet, ancient harmony of the afternoon. A middle-aged man arranging his basket of fish looked up and nodded slowly when he saw him. The craftsman nodded back. No words needed, just the meeting of two gazes, enough to say they were still healthy, still alive, still at peace. In those days, care never needed speeches. A nod was enough, a glance, a shared sigh. The craftsman paused before a small stall that sold little household things. Hemp cord, coarse needles, a few bits of pottery, and several bottles of herb oil. The stall belonged to an old man with silver hair, known for his low voice and a smile as gentle as the soil. The old man looked up, and his eyes brightened at the sight of the craftsman. "Oh," he said, his voice raspy but warm. "You look lighter today, more at ease." The craftsman let out a soft laugh. "Maybe because I lay under the tree too long. The tree must have taken pity on me and let me rest a while." The old man laughed too, a slow spreading smile that deepened the creases around his eyes. "Happiness is simple," the old man said. "All you need is some shade and a bit of wind." The craftsman nodded, and a smile. He added quietly. The old man waved a hand, flustered. "Oh, don't. My smile is old and worn." The craftsman shook his head gently. "Old, but true." The words made the old man pause for a moment. Something in his eyes softened, as if that small sentence had brushed against an old memory tucked away somewhere deep. He opened a bottle of herb oil and held it toward the craftsman. "Here, smell this. I mixed a new batch today. Might help you relax." The craftsman lifted the bottle to his nose, and a soft fragrance drifted out. Mint, a touch of wild basil, and the woody scent of cypress. Not sharp, not strong, but cool, clear, and opening a gentle space in his chest. "Smells lovely," he whispered. The old man smiled with quiet pride, like a child showing off a handmade toy. "My daughter picked the herbs. She has such a gentle touch, like the plants listen to her." The craftsman returned the bottle to the table, placing it down so softly it didn't make a sound. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing to fill the silence. The breeze slipped under the straw roofs, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. From somewhere behind the market, a distant call echoed, a mother calling her child home for supper, the sound blending into the fading light, like the final note of the afternoon's quiet orchestra. The craftsman moved on, continuing down the lane. He didn't buy anything, nor did he need to, because the most important exchange in the market was never the goods, but the greetings, the small questions, the simple smiles that reminded people they did not live alone. He approached a stall run by a young woman. She was selling small squares of handmade cheese, cut neatly and arranged on a wooden board. When she saw him, she bowed her head slightly, a gesture as delicate as a flower bending in the breeze. "Have you worked hard today, sir?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not hard," he said gently. "Just a little hungry." She laughed softly, a sound like water flowing over stones. "Would you like to try a piece?" She held out a small square of cheese. He took it and bit gently. Milk, salt, and the unmistakable flavor of someone's careful hands, all merging into a clean, simple taste. "Is it good?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Good. Good in the way that makes you remember home." The young woman smiled, not with large joy, but with the quiet brightness of understanding. The craftsman walked on. By now, the market road was soaked in golden light. People still spoke softly, no one raising their voice, no one needing to be loud to be heard. An old man walking with a cane brushed lightly against the craftsman's shoulder. "Pardon me, my legs are weak," he said. The craftsman held his arm gently, steadying him. "It's all right," he replied. "Weak legs just mean you've walked far." The old man let out a hearty laugh. "That's true. I've walked all my life. I suppose they deserve to be tired." They released each other, but their smiles lingered a moment longer. And in that small moment, the craftsman realized that all the tenderness in the world did not come from grand gestures. It came from half a loaf shared, a quiet question, a smile offered to a stranger, a nod between two people who had nothing to trade except kindness. And in this evening market, so many of those small kindnesses appeared so naturally that no one noticed they were doing anything beautiful. They were simply living, and gentleness was just an ordinary part of life. When the craftsman reached the end of the market, the sun was almost touching the horizon. He looked back at the path he had walked. The little stalls, the slow steps, the warm smiles, the voices that never needed to rise above a whisper. And he knew, in each small moment, there existed a world where kindness once lived everywhere. Not loudly, not demanding, not celebrated, just existing, like the last light of the day, resting quietly on the craftsman's hands. Part 7, the moment of sunset. The afternoon drifted by slowly, so slowly that the craftsman felt as though the sun itself was reluctant to leave the little village too soon. As he stepped away from the market and walked back toward his workshop, his shadow stretched long across the pale brown earth, blending with the last strips of daylight still lingering on the ground. The air no longer carried the damp chill of morning, nor the thin coolness of approaching night. It rested somewhere in between, a gentle warmth that made a person want to walk slower, breathe a little deeper, and stay present long enough not to miss the final glow of the fading day. His workshop came into view. The thatched roof was washed in a soft orange light, each strand of straw catching the sun's last warmth and glimmering as if lit from within. Light spilled across the wooden slats, so tender it resembled the breath of someone who had just awakened From the deepest midday sleep, the craftsman paused at the doorway. He didn't step inside yet. He didn't tidy anything. He simply stood still, hands resting at his sides, listening to the world around him slow down. Far away, birds were calling to one another, urging their companions back to the nest. Somewhere nearby, wooden clogs tapped softly against ground growing softer under the evening shade, and wind drifted through the bamboo fence, striking the narrow slats and making them hum with tiny, trembling notes. All the sounds folded into one gentle evening song, a song that, if heard during a tired moment, could make the heart loosen just a little. At last, he opened the workshop door. The old wood groaned softly, but instead of sounding harsh, it felt like the room's familiar greeting to the twilight. Inside, sunlight streamed through thin gaps in the walls, dividing the space into long, pale ribbons. Dust hovered in the air, catching the gold light and glimmering like tiny drifting grains. Everything, the shuttle, the small hammer, the sharpened blades, the weaving frame, the clay table, was coated in a warm glow, making them seem gentler, quieter, more tender than usual. The craftsman stepped in, his feet sinking lightly into the earth floor that still carried the warmth of the day. He took in the room slowly before beginning to put things away. He did not rush. He did not scrub or straighten too intensely. He simply returned each object to its familiar place, a ritual he had practiced since he was a young apprentice. The loom was covered with a cloth to keep dust off the woven threads. The shuttle was set across the wooden ridge. The polished blade was placed neatly in its box, slid into the lower shelf. Leftover clay was gathered into a round lump for use the next morning. The hammer and chisel were hung on a wooden peg on the wall, beneath a soft amber streak of sunlight. Every tool had its home, and the craftsman remembered each one. Without thinking, his hands moved on their own, as if they knew their way, long before his mind did. The light inside the workshop grew deeper, riche, turning golden as the sun sank lower. He placed his palm on the wooden table. The wood was warm, strangely warm, as though it had held on to the whole day's sunlight, just to give it back to him now. He drew a long breath. The smell of wood, of clay, of cooled metal, all mixed with the sinking light, creating a scent that belonged only to an ancient evening. Inside a small workshop, a scent that brought peace. Without needing explanation, he stepped toward the doorway again and stood still. Outside, the sky was changing. A long band of orange stretched outward, softening into pale violet at the edges. The light draped across the village roofs, turning the thatched tops into bowls of quiet gold. Wind carried the laughter of children from far away, a distant voice calling someone home for supper, and the faint bark of a dog somewhere near the end of the lane. Day was touching night, and in that moment, everything, the fields, the homes, the people, seemed to slow
Where did the little
into
bear
the same quiet rhythm the craftsman felt deep in his chest. That time itself was also pausing beside him. He lifted his hand, letting his palm catch The last bit of daylight. It was warm, but not hot. Light. So light, it felt ready to dissolve. And beautiful in the way. Only those who have worked through an entire day can truly understand. It was the feeling of completion. Not a grand achievement. Not a blazing pride. Just the fullness of knowing he had lived this day well. Without rushing. Without being pushed. He closed the workshop door. The sound of wood meeting wood echoed gently, like the soft closing of a book that had been read from start to finish. The day did not disappear. It simply lay down, making room for night. The craftsman lingered a moment longer, watching the sky shift into its last evening colors, then finally turned toward home. His shadow stretched along the dirt path, merging with the lengthening dusk. Slow, steady, and peaceful. Just like everything, the sunset wished to leave with him. After closing the workshop door, the craftsman lingered for a moment, as if trying to hold on to the last traces of light resting on the ground. Dusk was thinner now, yet somehow more beautiful, a pale orange ribbon drifting slowly across the sky. The evening breeze was so gentle it was almost imperceptible unless one watched the blades of grass bowing slightly in its wake. The earth beneath the craftsman's feet shifted in color from soil brown to warm gold, then gradually into a faint violet dissolving into the air. He drew in a slow, deep breath. The air was cooler, but not cold. Just cool enough to make the body curl in on itself a little, the way one might pull a blanket up to the chest on an easy evening. The craftsman began walking home. Each step made a soft thud against the firm ground, an understated sound that didn't disturb the silence but blended into it, like the gentle heartbeat of dusk. Passing an old fence, he noticed threads of smoke rising from the rooftops, drifting into the sky's fading colors. The thin gray spirals curled upward in slow, loose loops, giving the village the look of a living painting so peaceful that simply watching it was enough to dissolve the tiredness of an entire day. From far away came the scattered calls of chickens. Children's laughter faded. Someone's wooden clogs tapped the ground once, then fell quiet. The village was drawing itself inward, as though the whole place was pulling a soft blanket over its small world. The craftsman paused beside a small stream running by the road. The water still flowed, but in the late afternoon, the sound seemed slower than in the morning, as if even the stream had grown tired after the long hours. The last orange light of the day lay across the surface, breaking into trembling shards, like pieces of a tiny mirror drifting with the current. He cupped some water in his hands. It was cool, clear, and carried the faint scent of mountain stone. He pressed it to his face. The coolness slid down his neck and merged with his breath, waking him gently and soothing him all at once. When he stood up, the light had thinned even more delicate as a strand of thread. The sky had begun to shift into a blend of orange, violet, and a deepening blue near the upper edge. A few early stars flickered, testing their glow before night fully arrived. He continued walking. The road home looked different now than it had during the day. No noise, no activity. Just the quiet presence of houses resting beneath the deepening sky. On the thatched roofs, the last remaining patches of sunlight clung like tiny, quiet flames. They neither brightened nor dimmed, just stayed there softly, as if stretching the day a little longer. As he passed another fence, He brushed his hand along the wood. It was warm from the afternoon sun, the rough texture grounding him like touching the pulse of the village itself through the grain of the wood. He let his hand fall and walked on. A gray cat slipped out from between two houses and sat beside the path, its eyes glowing half gold, half green. The craftsman crouched slightly and held out a hand. The cat leaned into it, rubbing its head against his palm, letting out a soft, thread-like murr. A moment so small, so easy to miss. Yet to the craftsman, it warmed something inside him. The sky darkened another shade. The orange melted away, replaced by a deep violet spreading across the horizon. Homes began to glow from within, lamplight spilling through cracks in the doors, creamy. Warm streaks that looked like little pieces of sunlight returning for a final visit. The craftsman stopped at his door. Everything was quiet. No one calling out. Only the soft rustle of dry leaves brushing the thatched roof. He placed his hand on the wooden door. The familiar texture rough. Warm felt like the handshake of an old friend. At that moment, he realized that tonight's dusk felt different. Not because of the colors, not because of the light, but because he himself, after a whole day of working slowly, moving slowly, breathing slowly, had allowed his heart to fall into rhythm with time itself. Day was leaving. Night was arriving. And standing in that thin seam between the two, the craftsman felt only one thing: peace. Not the kind born from avoiding things, not the kind from hiding, but the peace of a day lived fully, quietly, without rushing. He opened the door. The warm lamplight spilled out soft, gentle like a pair of arms opening to welcome him home. Behind him, the last trace of dusk disappeared, but it left inside him something very tender, a sense of completion, fullness, and calm. Part 8, an old-time family supper. When the craftsman stepped into the house, the warm glow of the oil lamp spread softly across the small room, as if the space itself were wrapping its arms around him. A gentle scent of simple food rose from the clay pot on the hearth, making his stomach flutter, not from hunger, but from that familiar, tender comfort only home can give. The wooden table in the center of the room was modest in size. Its surface bore faint scratches from years of use, and its edges had rounded over time from countless hands touching it. On it lay a small woven cloth, neatly spread, holding a loaf of barley bread, wooden bowls, and a clay plate still warm from the fire. His wife was leaning over the pot, pouring in a little more water. Hearing the door open, she turned her head and smiled a slow, gentle smile that seemed to warm the room even more. "You're home," she said softly, as though not wanting to disturb anything that might be sleeping within the quiet walls. The craftsman smiled back, unfastened his cloak, and hung it on the wooden peg by the door. "Yes, the light faded quickly today," he replied, his voice low and calm. From the corner of the house, their young child ran toward him. The tiny feet thumped on the packed earth floor, thump, thump, before coming to a stop right beside him, looking up with wide, bright eyes that shone under the lamplight. "Father, you're back." The craftsman bent down and stroked the child's hair. It was soft, slightly messy from an afternoon of playing outside. He lifted the child, arms encircling that small back, as if he were holding the whole world in his hands. In that moment, all the exhaustion of the day melted like the last dust of sunlight. He set the child onto a chair, and the family gathered around the table. His wife adjusted the candle, letting the flame brighten just a little more. The flame trembled for a breath, then steadied, casting a warm golden light across the table. Their hands, and the craftsman's sun-darkened hair. The light wasn't strong, but it was enough to make everything look like it belonged to a beautiful memory. It made the old wooden spoon seem gentler. It made the simple boiled greens look warm and inviting. And it wrapped the whole room in a cocoon of safety that even time wouldn't dare disturb. His wife ladled soup from the clay pot into each bowl. Steam rose softly, carrying scents of forest greens, root vegetables, and that unmistakable warmth of an evening meal made from simple things. The child held small hands in front of the hot bowl, eyes half closed as the heat touched the fingers. The sight made the craftsman exhale a long, quiet breath, as if time itself were laying a hand on his shoulder and whispering, "Enough for today." He took the loaf of barley bread and tore it into 3 pieces. The bread was dark, its crust cracked into tiny lines like wood grain. As he pressed gently, it made a faint crack soft, but clear enough that all 3 of them looked over and chuckled. That was the sound of their evening meal. Not the hiss of oil, not the clang of pans, just the gentle crack of bread, like the opening line of a familiar story the family had heard 100 times. He handed 1 piece to his wife, 1 to his child. The little one took a big bite, crumbs clinging to the corners of the mouth before a bright, crumb-covered smile appeared. That small laugh warmed the room quiet, but bright, like its own little flame. It drifted into the warm air, touched the wooden beams, and filled the craftsman's chest with a soothing softness no medicine could ever give. Dinner wasn't elaborate. Bread, a bowl of hot soup, a few forest greens, a small piece of cheese his wife had bought at the morning market. But the simplicity of it made it feel more complete than any grand feast. Was the workshop busy today? His wife asked, her voice gentle and even, as if telling a story to herself. The craftsman took a sip of soup, breathed in the steam, and answered, "Not busy, but I finished a good amount." The wind was kind. The light was good. Everything moved slowly, but smoothly. Their child leaned over the table, eyes round. "Tell a story." "Father." He turned his head and smiled, the kind of smile carved into his face after a lifetime under the sun. "What story?" "The one about when you learned your trade." Leaning back in his chair, the craftsman set down his bowl and began speaking in a slow, soothing tone. "When I was small, I learned in a workshop even smaller than this house. Every morning, my master woke before the sun. He used to say, 'When the sky is still sleepy, your hands work softer.'" "Nee." The child giggled, and the wife smiled quietly, turning her bowl in her hands so the warmth spread to her fingertips. The craftsman continued, weaving each sentence as if he were threading it with the candlelight. He was strict, but gentle. He didn't speak much. Mostly he repeated one thing: "Work slowly. Child, things made warm will make the people who use them feel joy." "Yes." The child pressed both palms against the warm bowl and whispered, "It is warm." The whole family laughed softly.
The whole village
Not loud,
drifts into a dreamlike
not
hush.
sharp,
Snow, breath,
but warm,
night merging into a
low,
sea, floating quiet.
and comforting, like the sound of a log breaking gently in a fire. The craftsman looked across the table, The candlelight lit his wife's face in a way that felt ancient, like the soft shades of charcoal and oil in old paintings. She was no longer young, but tonight the light made every line. Every shadow on her face looked kind beautiful in their own quiet way. He glanced at their child's small hands gripping a wooden spoon. Those tiny hands would grow someday. They would leave this table. But for now, right now, they were here, under the candlelight, inside the warmth of family. Just that. And for the craftsman, it was enough. The candle flickered. The flame leaned to one side, then straightened again, casting shifting shadows on the table. Those shadows trembled softly like the breath of an old memory passing through. And in that fragile moment, the craftsman felt that time wasn't moving at all. There was no past, no future, only the glow of the candle, the scent of hot soup, and the soft laughter of his wife and child. That was their supper. Simple, quiet, and warm enough to make the whole world outside fade away. Dinner drifted on slowly, like a quiet stream sliding through the yard. Steam rose from the wooden bowls, curling into thin ribbons before fading into the air, creating a warm, misty veil around the table. The candlelight shone through that drifting steam, making it glow like soft bands of golden smoke dancing gently in the room. The craftsman lifted his bowl and took another sip. The heat touched his lips, then slipped down his throat and blossomed warmly in his chest. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to feel the tenderness in the simple meal his wife had made with such quiet care. She watched him, noticed the ease settling across his face, and smiled a small, soft smile of someone who had seen her husband return home after long days for many years, yet still felt her heart loosen each time. Their young child, however, was far more fascinated by the flickering candlelight than the food. The little one lifted small hands and waved them in front of the flame, creating shadows on the wall. A bird, a rabbit, then a shape that didn't look like anything at all. But the child giggled anyway, delighted by it. "What are you making?" the craftsman asked, half laughing. "A wolf," the child said with complete seriousness, which made both parents laugh softly. The craftsman shook his head gently and cupped his bowl again. In the candlelight, his face looked peaceful, so peaceful it seemed as though not a single worry from the day had followed him home. Across the table, his wife opened a small piece of cheese and sliced it into thin pieces with the dull old knife she had used for years. The blade tapped the wooden board with a small talk, a sound so soft it felt like the entire house had learned to speak in whispers. She pushed the cheese toward him. "Eat a little more," she said. "It'll help with the tiredness." He nodded, broke off a small piece, and tasted it. The gentle creaminess melted slowly, blending with the warm flavor of the soup still lingering in his throat. Simple yet enough to fill the heart. The child watched his father eat, then proudly held up a piece of bread. "Look, Father, I bit it into the shape of a moon." The craftsman studied it carefully, then nodded with that quiet, gentle amusement of his. "It's beautiful," he said. "Your moon looks better than the one in the sky." The child grinned, eyes almost disappearing in the smile, and leaned comfortably against the mother's arm. She brushed a hand through the small head of hair, her touch warm, soft, carrying the gentle heat of the hearth fire. A breeze slipped through the door's edge, making the candle flame tremble. Light rippled across the walls, spreading in soft circles like water rings on a calm lake. For a moment, all three fell silent, not out of fear the flame would go out, but because the trembling light was simply beautiful. It made the room look like a piece of living memory, as if someone were opening an old book and letting candlelight fall across its pages. The craftsman looked around. Everything was simple to the point of unbelievability. A worn wooden table, 3 clay bowls, 1 small candle, and the 2 people he loved sitting beside him. Yet that simplicity was exactly what made him feel the fullness of his life so clearly. "Tell the story from this afternoon," the child said suddenly, eyes bright like 2 tiny drops of light. "What story?" "The one about the craftsman you talked to at the market." He chuckled. Even the smallest things became grand adventures in a child's world. Setting his bowl aside, he began. "This afternoon, the blacksmith asked if I was tired. I said no. Then he asked if I was happy. I said no again. So he said, 'Not tired, not happy, then you must be peaceful.'" "Ah." The child tilted their head. "What is peaceful?" "Father." The craftsman looked toward the small window. Outside, the sky had deepened to violet, sprinkled with a few early stars whose light trembled like tiny breaths of night. He answered softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "Peaceful is when you sit and eat with the people you love and stop thinking about anything at all." The child considered this seriously, then nodded hard as if the meaning had settled deep. His wife looked at him, her eyes warm, touched with a quiet emotion that moved gently, like water brushing over stone. "I think that's true," she whispered. "A simple meal, but it calms the heart so easily." The candle flickered again. This time, the light spread into 2, then 3 soft layers across the wall, turning the room into what felt like a fading golden dream. Under the table, the craftsman reached for his wife's hand. Her hand was rough from a day's work, but warm. He squeezed gently. She answered with an even softer squeeze. Small, but deep. Their child propped their chin on the table, eyelids drooping, caught between waking and drifting. The warmth of the soup, the soft crackle of the candle, and the father's slow voice lulled the little one into a gentle drowsiness. The craftsman watched the child, then the candlelight. Everything slowed. No hurried sounds. No tasks left to chase. No pieces of the day clinging stubbornly to his mind. Only this. A family gathered in a soft glow, like a memory still warm. In that moment, he understood fully that he wasn't just eating dinner. He was living inside one of life's quietest, most beautiful moments. A moment where night approached, and the candle tried to hold on to the day's final warmth. A moment so simple, so tender, that even time itself seemed to pause just to witness it. Part 9, The Quiet Before Sleep. Night had settled over the village without anyone noticing when it began. The candle in the kitchen had been blown out, leaving only a gentler kind of light, moonlight slipping through the half-open wooden window. It fell across the packed earth floor and the rough wall, forming a pale, soft streak, as delicate as the first breath of night mist. The craftsman rose from the dinner table, quietly moving his chair aside so it wouldn't make a sound. The house seemed to be holding its breath, not from silence, but from the peace resting over everything. He stepped into the sleeping room. It wasn't large, just enough space for a low wooden bed, layered with soft, dried grass and covered by a hand-woven blanket worn after many years. The walls were plain, and wind slipped through the gaps in the planks, creating a faint rustling. Sounds so gentle they made the night feel even warmer. He bent down and picked up the blanket, gave it a soft shake. The dried grass underneath whispered, "Shuff, shuff," like someone lightly smoothing fabric with the palm of their hand. A simple movement, but to the craftsman, it was a nightly ritual, a way to say farewell to the day and step quietly into a new night. His wife finished tidying the kitchen and entered the room as well. Her bare feet touched the cool floor, making a sound as soft as a bird's wing brushing water. Their child followed behind her, eyes already heavy, still rubbing them from the warmth of the soup earlier. "Come to bed, little one," she murmured. The child climbed onto the bed and lay down between the places where the parents would sleep. The dried grass rustled beneath the small body, making the child giggle for a moment, before quieting again under the calm of the night. The craftsman sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing the dried grass with his hand. He leaned slightly toward the small window. Tonight, the sky was brighter than usual. The moon hung high, its light drifting through thin clouds, casting a soft blue-white glow across the room. He drew in a slow breath. The night air was thick with the scent of earth, dry leaves, and the wooden frame of the bed that had absorbed years of warmth from the bodies sleeping on it. It was the smell of safety, the smell of home, the smell of a full day gently closing. He lay down, pulling the blanket up to his chest. The dried grass beneath him felt softer than he expected, as if it understood his tiredness and wanted to lift some of it away. When he shifted slightly to find a comfortable spot, the grass made a small, rounded rustle, like silk being smoothed flat. Beside him, his wife lay down too, her breathing mixed with his. Too slow, steady rhythms, warm and soothing. Their child curled up between them, searching for warmth in the gentle pull of sleep that drifted in like a quiet stream. Outside, the night sounds grew clearer. The long, thin notes of insects singing like a string being brushed by the wind. The soft touching of leaves, and the breeze weaving along the thatched roof in waves as gentle as distant surf. All of it blended into a night song unlike anything heard during the day. A song with no strong beats, no sharp turns, only long breaths drawn out into darkness. The craftsman looked up at the wooden beam above him. Moonlight slid across it, leaving a thin silver line, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, depending on the wind slipping past the window. His eyes grew heavy, not the kind of heavy one fights against, but the kind that settles in quietly with each breath, each leaf sound, each tiny ripple in the dark. His wife turned toward him and placed a hand on his arm. "Let's sleep early tonight," she whispered, her voice soft enough to fall onto the roof like a feather. He nodded. No words needed, only feeling. Their child shifted, pressing a warm little face against his shoulder. The child's breath was soft, warm and sweet, like the smell of freshly cut grass. That breath softened the craftsman's heart even further. He closed his eyes, not to fall asleep immediately, but to listen more deeply to the night surrounding the room. Her faint tapping far away, wind holding the roof. Every sound melted and flowed into one slow, steady current. So slow he could almost feel each passing second drop like tiny beads of water. Then, in a single gentle moment, from a breath, or from the moonlight, he couldn't tell which. He felt as though he were lying in a cocoon, soft, enclosed, warm. Nothing left from the day. No voices calling. No thoughts asking for tomorrow. It was as if the whole world outside was standing guard at the door, keeping the night safe for him. This was the threshold between wakefulness and sleep. The moment a person can feel only when they truly feel safe. A moment when eyelids begin to fall, begin to close, begin to slip into a deeper, quieter place. The craftsman let go a little more. His shoulders softened. His back loosened. His breathing grew even, like the hush of a distant tide. And in the moment his eyes finally closed completely, he felt himself being held. Not by the roof. Not by the moon. Not by anything he could touch. But by something ancient. The feeling of belonging. The feeling of being somewhere no tiredness, no fear, no worry could reach. Only night, holding everything, softly, completely. The room now held nothing but the thin glow of moonlight brushing against the walls. The candle in the other room had already gone out, leaving behind the faint, sweet scent of cooled wax, blending with the smell of dried grass from the bed. The wind still slid through the cracks in the wooden frame, but every time it came, it was so soft, like someone gently lifting a thin curtain before stepping away. The craftsman lay still, his breath steady, like a small boat drifting across a quiet river. His eyelids grew a little heavier, not the kind of heaviness one tries to resist, but the gentle kind. A heaviness that feels like being tucked into a deep, warm blanket. The child beside him was almost asleep. Each tiny breath brushed against the craftsman's hand like a little breeze. He shifted his hand slightly to rest it on the child's back. That feeling, his palm resting on the warm body of someone he loved, made his heart settle into an even deeper calm. His wife turned slightly, pulling the blanket to cover all three of them. She said nothing, but in the dim moonlight, that small gesture felt warmer than any words. Slow, quiet, carrying the care of many years shared together. Outside, the night deepened. At first, only the soft rustle of leaves, then the long, slender call of insects, like a string being gently drawn. Then the wind bending the thatched roof into soft, wavering curves against the dark sky. Everything blended into a single layer of sound. Steady, steady, steady. As if the night itself were lulling the house, the people in it, and every thought in the craftsman's mind, into small, sinking circles at the bottom of a still pool. The craftsman opened his eyes one last time. Just a thin slit, enough to see the moon shining on the wooden beam overhead. A pale white streak like spilled milk. That line of light reminded him of childhood nights, lying on the dirt floor of the old house, watching moonlight fall just like this, believing the moon was keeping watch over his sleep. All these years later, the feeling was the same. Some things time simply cannot take, especially moments that make a person feel safe. He closed his eyes again. His breath slowed. His heartbeat softened. His whole body felt as though it were sinking into soft earth, as if the bed was no longer a bed, but a gentle space holding him from all sides. The sounds of the day had vanished. No hammer, no marketplace, no footsteps, only the whisper of the night. The child shifted, pressing even closer. The touch was so small, yet felt like a reminder that he was not only a craftsman, but a place someone turned to when night came. A place to lean into, a place to sleep safely. The wind slipped through the wooden cracks again, a bit stronger this time. It puffed up the blanket slightly, like the room itself was breathing. Moonlight trembled with the movement, making the bright patches on the wall ripple gently, like the heartbeat of the night. The craftsman let his mind drift with that light. He did not think about tomorrow. He did not think about unfinished work. He thought of nothing but this moment, lying between the two warm bodies he loved most in the world. A slow breath escaped from his chest. It sounded like a small whisper being offered to the night. I am here. I am home. I am safe. His fingers loosened. His legs grew heavy. His body softened into a half-sleep, where everything moves so slowly it barely moves at all. Outside, the night kept singing. Rustle, hush, soft, steady, close. A small leaf fell from the thatched roof and tapped the doorway. The sound was so faint that no one would have heard it in daylight. But at night, every sound became softer, clearer, carrying its own weight. The craftsman heard the leaf touch the ground, like a piece of dream brushing down. Strangely, that tiny sound made his eyes close more fully, as if sleep itself were pulling gently on his hand. He tugged the blanket up a little higher. The woven fabric touched his chin soft. Familiar. That blanket had followed them through many cold seasons, many restless nights, many long winters. It carried the smell of family, of time, of tenderness used again and again, until it became part of the home. His wife exhaled a longer breath. The child breathed like a small cat. Their two rhythms blended with his. 3 quiet pulses rising and falling together, as gentle as sunlight drying on a courtyard. He let himself float on those 3 breaths, not resisting, not grasping, not trying. And in that moment, when his eyes closed deeper and deeper and fully, it felt as though an invisible hand rested on his forehead. A very light hand, like his mother's when he was small. A touch, soft, warm. The warmth spread through him, from his forehead to his chest, down to his arms and legs. It wasn't the blanket's warmth, nor the breath of those beside him, but the warmth of absolute safety. In the final breath, before sleep claimed him, the craftsman felt himself drift into the night, like a small point of light, without fear, without sorrow, without thought, only sleep. A sleep guarded by the whole world, standing quietly outside his door. Part 10, the sleep of the ancients, the breath of time. Night had entered its deepest hour. A thick, gentle darkness lay over the thatched roofs, the earthen path, the stones beside the doorway. A darkness soft as a silk cloth draped across the entire village. Everything was quiet, not silent, but joined together in a harmony of tiny, ancient sounds. Insects in the distant fields began their long, drawn-out song, a sound without edges, without urgency, stretching like a single, unbroken breath. The wind moved across the rice fields, carrying with it a soft shh like a hand smoothing a piece of cloth. Now and then, a night bird shifted its perch, the faintest flutter of wings, so small it could easily be mistaken for a leaf falling. Inside the small house, those sounds entered through the wooden cracks, blending into the slow, steady breathing of the three people lying together on the bed of grass. The craftsman lay still. The dry grass beneath him softened his weight, and the hand-woven blanket across his body held the warmth of many winters past. His breath joined with the breaths of his wife and child. Three slow, even rhythms forming a tiny thread of life weaving through the room. Outside, the sky spread out like a vast black sea. The moon hung high, but its light had thinned, reduced to a trembling brushstroke whenever the wind passed through the clouds. That faint line of light slipped into the room through the small window, a drop of white milk falling onto the floor. The craftsman opened his eyes just barely, not to look at anything, but to feel the moonlight rest on his eyelids. The light curved along the shape of his lashes, as soft as a hand cupping his face. He released a long breath. It dissolved into the night, like a story whispered so gently no one could catch the end of the sentence. It didn't matter. The night had heard enough. Outside, the insects continued their song. Their calls curled into one another, forming an old melody, the same one heard by the farmers, healers, artisans, and young mothers, hundreds of years before him. A melody people had fallen asleep to for generations. He felt as if he were lying not only on his bed, but on the bed of all those who came before him, as though hundreds, thousands of breaths from the past were resting beneath this layer of grass, waiting for him to join their quiet current. His hand moved across the blanket. The coarse threads were a little rough to the touch, but carried a warmth rich with memory. The warmth of stories told by candlelight, of winters survived, of nights when rain whispered on the roof. He pulled the blanket up a little higher. The night brushed his skin cool, but gentle, like the quiet breath of the earth. The child lay between them, breathing lightly, a breath soft as growing grass. Each time the child shifted, the blanket rippled in tiny waves, waves slow as a distant tide. His wife turned, her hair brushing his shoulder. Her hair carried the scent of the afternoon sun, of the hearth, of the home they had built over many years. That scent made the craftsman let out another long breath. Deeper, softer. The world of daylight stopped at the bedroom door, unable to enter. The market, the work, the hammering, the chatter of neighbors, all remained outside, thinning like mist. Inside the room, there was only their breathing, the night sounds, the moonlight, and the softness of a day completely lived. The craftsman felt himself sinking, not into darkness, but into a deep, ancient kind of light, a light seen not with the eyes, but with the chest. The night grew deeper still. The insects' song thinned. The wind slowed, almost as if it too were falling asleep. Everything outside the house began to retreat. The distant fields faded. The leaves softened. A villager's footsteps somewhere far away dissolved into air. Every sound drew back into itself, like ripples folding back toward the shore. He felt the shift. He didn't hear each sound disappear. He simply sensed the night closing in, holding them more closely. For a brief moment, a moment so quick it might not have existed, he felt as though he no longer lay in this small room, but far beneath the soft earth, among the breaths of ancestors, of histories, of people who once lived at the same pace he lived now. It wasn't a frightening darkness. It was darkness like the inside of tree bark. Dim, safe. A darkness where one can finally see quiet. The wind slowed until it was almost silent. The insects hummed faintly, as if struck from a faraway string. The moon slipped behind a veil of clouds, and its white light faded, leaving only a pale blue shadow. Everything, every sound, every motion, every glimmer of light began to fade, 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 until he could no longer tell where the night ended and where his breathing began, where the bed of grass was, where his body was, or where sleep waited. Only one thing remained, clear and full, a silence as rich as the soil beneath the village, a silence not empty, but overflowing, a silence that opened the heart, softened it, and carried it away. He sank into that silence, no longer feeling the grass beneath his back, no longer hearing his own breath, no longer sensing where he ended. And the world began. There was only the night, only the deep settling of all things, only a sleep approaching like an ancient hand, gently touching his forehead to whisper, "Rest now. This hour belongs to me." The night continued to sink, falling deeper layer by layer. Every movement, every whisper, every echo that existed moments ago. The wind, the soft beat of a nightbird's wings, the thin, silvery thread of insect song. All of them drifted backward, slipping farther and farther away, as if being drawn into a place beyond human hearing. The craftsman lay there without moving. His body rested exactly where the night wanted it. A perfect position where no muscle needed to hold on, and nothing inside him felt the urge to stay awake. He exhaled, very softly. His breath was so faint that even he could barely hear it. But the room heard. The night heard, and they seemed to answer by slowing themselves another beat, creating a tender hollow between the distant sounds. The blanket over him felt like a layer of dry forest leaves. Not heavy, not shifting, just holding him lightly, as if even the last tiny sadness of the day was being sheltered. Beside him, his wife had already fallen into deep sleep. Her breath was steady and warm, like an old lullaby whose words were forgotten, but whose melody lived on. The child breathed too, faster, younger, softer. When the child's small breaths blended with their parents', the three rhythms formed a chord, a gentle chord that anyone listening long enough could simply drift into sleep alongside. A thin breeze brushed past the roof. The thatch rustled, a sound so small it was like someone shifting lightly on a bed of grass. Then silence. The night felt like a gentle giant, sitting at the bedside, raising one hand to soften the light, so the three of them could sleep more peacefully. The craftsman felt himself floating, not floating on water, but floating on quiet itself. A quiet thick and smooth, as freshly loosened earth after a soft rain. He no longer felt the weight of his body, nor the tension of his shoulders. nor the beating of his own heart. Every sensation was being soothed, as if he were being held by the mother hand of time. A hand ancient, yet still warm. Outside, a large cloud drifted across the moon. The pale light slowed, thinned, and faded into a thread of silk. The dimming of the moon did not darken the room. Instead, it made it warmer, more enclosed, as though the night were pulling the blanket tighter to keep anything from slipping in. The craftsman breathed out. That breath was round, steady, gentle. The breath of someone with nothing left to hold, nothing left to fear, nothing left unfinished. A deep, natural sleepiness began rising through him, not along any particular path, but like water soaking into soil. His toes grew heavier, then his ankles, then his knees, then his back, then even his chest began to slow. Everything blurred. Everything grew still. Everything matched the rhythm of the night. In that blur, he felt as if he were lying not only with his family, but with all who had ever slept before him. Old craftsmen, old farmers, children from ancient days, mothers from forgotten winters, all gathering into one vast breath that filled the room. It wasn't nostalgia. It wasn't memory. It was belonging. A feeling so deep that he knew he had never been alone, was not alone now, and would never be alone in this sleep. Outside, the insect's song slowly faded. Not suddenly, but like a final goodnight, pulling itself back one note at a time. The wind calmed too. Each stroke of breeze across the thatch grew lighter, thinner, and then almost disappeared. The only things left were the warmth of human bodies, the steady pulse of 3 sleeping breaths, and a small, round, safe sound, like the heartbeat of the home itself. And then, everything reached the final point of the night. A perfect silence. Not an empty silence, but a silence created after every gentle sound had completed its work. A silence people can only meet when the night is at its most beautiful. The craftsman no longer opened his eyes. His body no longer shifted. His breath was soft as dew. He sank into sleep, the way a seed sinks into soil. Deep, quiet, fully held. He did not know when sleep took him. He did not know how far the night had gone. He did not need to know. Only one truth remained as he slipped into the deepest part of rest. He was protected, placed in the center of time, sleeping the way the ancients once slept, in a night with nothing left to think about. You don't need to fix anything tonight. The night outside continues, never rushing, never pushing. The insects have withdrawn into the dark, leaving only a few scattered notes behind, like the last dots at the end of a long story. The wind has settled under the trees, no longer whispering through the thatched roofs. What remains is a softness so quiet, you could almost touch it with your fingertips. And in that stillness, the story of the old craftsman drifts away into the night, like a slow river gliding through centuries. You're lying there now, in your own room, in your own time. Yet it feels as though you've just stepped out of that gentle old village, just left the warm family table, just laid yourself down on a bed of dry grass beneath an ancient moon. Something soft, something peaceful, moves across your shoulders, as if the ancient breaths we walked through together are still lingering in your room, floating quietly, resting gently around the air that surrounds you. You don't need to look back at the whole journey. You don't need to analyze any part of it, because this story wasn't told for your mind to work. It was told for your body to loosen, for your heart to settle, for your breath to slow. It was told so you would remember that across generations, humans have always shared the same moment you're in now. That moment of wanting to rest, to let go, to hear a soft voice telling a gentle story at the end of a long day. And tonight, you are here with that moment. The craftsman's breath has folded into the breath of the wind. His ancient rhythm of sleep has dissolved into the night. His small, humble home has surrendered to silence. And you're standing at the threshold of your own sleep. A sleep that asks nothing from you. A sleep that does not require effort. That does not ask you to be better, stronger, or more. Maybe tonight, you don't need to brace yourself anymore. You don't need to understand life. You don't need to hold everything together. You only need to breathe. A quiet inhale and a long, slow exhale to let sleep come to you, just as it came to generations before you. Those who lay beneath old roofs, beneath moonlight, beneath the chorus of night insects, and let everything hold them in a deep, ancient silence. You too. You are being placed into that same embrace, the embrace of time, the embrace of a peace no era can take away. You don't need to force sleep. You don't need to count. You don't need to fight your thoughts. Just let everything drift. Like an ancient river, gentle, slow, never in a hurry. Inhale softly, not deep, just enough for your lungs to open a little. And then exhale slowly, as if setting down a heavy bag after carrying it all day. With every exhale, a layer of your worry loosens. A layer of tension slides away. A layer of exhaustion falls off you, like a small grain of dust under moonlight. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you are allowed to slow down. Tonight, you don't have to become anyone else. You only need to be yourself, exactly as you are, exactly where you're lying, exactly as your breath rises and falls. Now, let your thoughts drift away, like that ancient river. No holding, no pushing, no pulling, just letting them go. Inhale softly, as if welcoming a gentle nightfall. Exhale slowly, as if laying yourself down in a soft field. You are safe. You are calm. And you are being held by everything the night knows how to give. If your eyes begin to feel heavy, let them be heavy. If your breath slows, let it slow. If your body feels like it's melting into the bed, let it melt. You don't need to hold anything anymore. May tonight bring you deep rest. A night where your mind is washed clean with quiet. A night where sleep arrives as gently as moonlight sliding through a window and stays with you until morning. And if you wish to hear more soft stories like this, leave a little goodnight message and return whenever your heart needs a peaceful sleep. This is History Fall Asleep, where history is told in a slow breath, guiding you from worry to calm to rest to sleep.